The early morning light spilled through the enormous windows of Sierra National Airport, casting a soft golden hue across the busy terminal. Rachel Morgan, 34, walked with calm assurance among the throngs of travelers, her long blonde hair tucked beneath a simple black baseball cap. Dressed in a dark charcoal sweatshirt and matching sweatpants, she moved through the crowd unnoticed, just another face among many. A single silver bracelet shimmered faintly on her wrist. Worn and unassuming, it was her grandmother's and the only accessory she wore. To the average onlooker, Rachel appeared like any other passenger prioritizing comfort for a long flight. No one would have guessed she was married to Julian Morgan, a billionaire tech entrepreneur who had recently purchased Altura Air as part of his ever-expanding transportation empire. Rachel glanced at the modest watch on her wrist, its scratched face a reminder of simpler times. She still had ample time before boarding began for Flight 319 to Riverton, where her parents would be celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. Julian had offered to send their private jet, but Rachel had politely declined. She chose to fly commercial every now and then to stay grounded, connected to the everyday world her wealth so easily shielded her from. "Just a regular black coffee, please," she said, with a warm smile to the young barista behind the cafe counter. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a few folded bills rather than tapping the high-limit card nestled in her phone case. "Heading anywhere exciting?" the barista asked, handing over her drink. "Riverton." "Family gathering," she replied, dropping the change into the tip jar with a nod. "Well, safe travels," he said with a grin. Coffee in hand, Rachel made her way to Gate C4. She paused along the way, her gaze resting on a spectrum of humanity. Families traveling with young children, elderly couples quietly leaning into each other, business travelers furiously typing away on laptops. It moved her in a way it always did. Having grown up in a modest farming town in northern Idaho, these ordinary moments reminded her of where she came from, long before she'd met Julian at a sustainability tech symposium, where she'd presented her research on clean energy. A voice rang out over the intercom. "Now boarding all first-class passengers for Altura Air Flight 319 to Riverton." Rachel adjusted the strap of her faded canvas backpack, no designer logos, just memories etched into its fabric, and moved toward the priority boarding lane. She joined a small line of well-dressed travelers. One man in a sharp navy suit gave her a quick glance, then did a double take, unable to mask his confusion at her casual outfit. "Boarding pass, please," said the gate agent with a well-practiced smile. Rachel offered her phone for scanning. The agent's eyes flickered between the first-class marking and Rachel's relaxed appearance. For a split second, the smile faltered, only slightly. "Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Enjoy your flight." Rachel gave a polite nod and walked down the jet bridge, unaware that the events about to unfold would not only shake Altura Air to its core, but set off a chain reaction that would be remembered across the airline industry. The first-class cabin of Altura Air Flight 319 was everything a luxury traveler would expect. Plush leather seats in deep navy, brushed brass accents, polished walnut paneling, and flight attendants already circulating with glasses of sparkling wine. Rachel stepped into the cabin quietly, taking in the calm buzz of the elite atmosphere. From her position near the front, Sandra Lee, a seasoned flight attendant, looked up from her tray of drinks. Her eyes paused on Rachel and her easy, unembellished attire. Her professional smile flickered, not quite disappearing, but certainly shaken. "Good morning," Rachel said warmly, glancing briefly at her boarding pass. "Seat 2A." Sandra raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow, the doubt unmistakable in her expression. "First class is to your left," she said, with a tight, measured tone. "I know," Rachel replied kindly, stepping past her with the grace of someone unbothered by side glances. She moved toward her assigned seat, aware of the lingering looks behind her. The cabin was only half full. Across the aisle sat a woman in a designer dress with a diamond tennis bracelet. To the right, two businessmen murmured over reports. and at the far end, a celebrity chef she recognized from TV was scrolling through his tablet. Rachel tucked her backpack into the overhead bin and eased into her seat by the window, pulling out a creased paperback novel. "Excuse me, Mom," came a quiet but firm voice. A male flight attendant had approached, Mark Ellis, judging by his name tag. His expression was polite, but tense. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Rachel looked up calmly, sensing the skepticism in his eyes. "Of course." She retrieved her phone and displayed the pass again. Mark studied the screen longer than necessary. Then he looked back at her outfit, clearly trying to connect dots that didn't add up in his mind. "One moment," he said, walking back toward Sandra. The two began whispering, both occasionally glancing toward Rachel, who sat patiently, silently, but with growing awareness that this was going to be more than just a normal flight. Mark Ellis returned to the front of the cabin, where he quietly spoke with Sandra Lee. Both stole glances toward Rachel Morgan, their unease poorly concealed. Across the aisle, the businessman in the tailored suit lifted his newspaper slightly, but continued observing. Rachel inhaled slowly, recognizing the pattern. Assumptions had taken root. Sandra soon reappeared, now accompanied by another crew member, Lauren Hayes, the lead flight attendant on board. Her name badge gleamed against the deep blue of her uniform. Rachel set her book down and met her gaze calmly. "Mom," Lauren began, her tone polished but cool, "there appears to be a discrepancy with your boarding pass." "There's no discrepancy," Rachel said evenly. "I'm seated in 2A, first class." Lauren's smile tightened. "Sometimes our system auto-assigns seats incorrectly. This is the premium cabin, and you don't think I belong here?" Rachel finished the sentence for her, her voice calm but edged with quiet firmness. A flicker of discomfort crossed Lauren's composed face. "That's not what I'm saying. We just need to double-check." "You've already checked twice," Rachel pointed out. "The boarding pass clearly says 2A." The tension in the cabin was rising. Eyes turned. Conversations faded. Several first-class passengers now watched the unfolding exchange with poorly masked curiosity. Mark stood nearby, arms folded across his chest, looking like a man who played this scene out before and expected the same ending. "Perhaps there was an upgrade mix-up," Sandra offered, her tone implying how unlikely she believed that scenario to be. "Or perhaps," Rachel countered, "I bought this seat like anyone else. Is there a specific dress code I missed?" Lauren's professional veneer slipped just slightly. "No official dress code," she admitted, "but our premium passengers typically present themselves in a way that reflects the Altura Air first-class experience." "So not about the ticket," Rachel said softly. "About how I look." An older gentleman seated across the aisle cleared his throat. "I've flown first class in sweats more times than I can count," he said. No one ever blinked an eye. Lauren's face flushed. "Sir, this is a matter for the crew to handle." "It shouldn't be happening at all," he muttered, returning to his reading. Sandra leaned toward Lauren and whispered something quickly. Lauren nodded and turned back to Rachel. "Mom, the flight is full. We need to ensure all passengers are in their correct seats. Our system indicates that 2A is reserved for a R. Morgan." "That's right," Rachel said plainly. "Rachel Morgan." Mark stepped forward, his tone suddenly sharp. "Do you have identification to verify that?" Rachel remained composed, though irritation sparked beneath her calm. None of the other passengers were asked to prove who they are after boarding. "My pass was scanned and accepted." "It's standard procedure when there's uncertainty," Lauren replied with a firm edge. "What uncertainty?" Rachel asked. "Besides the fact I'm not wearing heels and pearls." Nearby passengers fidgeted, some pretending not to listen, others now clearly invested in the outcome. A woman a few rows back whispered to her companion, "If she paid for the ticket, what's the problem?" Lauren's posture stiffened. "Mom, if you cannot verify your identity, we'll need to assign you a seat in the economy cabin." Rachel sat straighter, meeting her gaze. I can verify my identity. That's not the issue here. The issue is that I shouldn't have to. No one else has been asked to. If you are Ms. Morgan, Mark said, barely masking the sarcasm in his voice, then this should be easy. Rachel's reply was calm but cutting. This isn't protocol. It's prejudice. If I had walked in wearing a designer trench coat and a Louis Vuitton bag, none of this would be happening. Lauren polished mask dropped entirely now. You're disrupting the boarding process. You either provide identification, move to economy, or to plane. Rachel glanced around the cabin. Some faces offered her quiet sympathy. Others watched like it was theater. She could end this, easily. A name drop. One sentence. My husband owns this airline. But that wasn't how she chose to live. She had never once used Julian's name to bend the rules in her favor. This, Rachel said clearly and without raising her voice, is discrimination. I bought my seat just like everyone else here. Lauren's tone turned icy. Your options are clear. Verification, reassignment, or removal. The fire of injustice flared in Rachel's chest. But she also saw the trap. If she made a scene, they'd paint her as difficult. She was stuck in a no-win situation designed to wear her down. She drew a breath and looked Lauren straight in the eyes. Fine, she said. Ill move. Fine, Rachel Morgan said quietly, the fire in her chest barely restrained. Ill move. But I want your names on your employee numbers. This isn't over. Mark Ellis gave the faintest smirk. We'll arrange a seat for you in economy and reimburse the fare difference. I don't want compensation, Rachel replied, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. I want accountability. As she rose, she felt a ripple of energy through the cabin. A few passengers offered sympathetic looks. Others quickly turned away, pretending not to have witnessed the moment. The older gentleman who had spoken up earlier simply shook his head in silent disapproval. With the cold detachment of a disciplinary escort, Sandra Lee gestured for Rachel to follow her down the aisle. The walk through the premium cabin felt like a quiet parade of shame. In business class, curious passengers looked up, their eyes scanning Rachel as the whispers began to build. Still, Rachel walked with her head held high. She refused to let them see how much it stung. This way, Sandra said, stopping abruptly. She motioned to a cramped middle seat between two strangers in row 24. We apologize for the inconvenience. Rachel looked her squarely in the eyes. No, you don't, she said. But you might soon enough. The next morning, light shimmered against the sleek steel and glass of Altura Air's corporate headquarters in downtown Sierra City. The building, perched against a mountainous backdrop, was designed to represent prestige and innovation, a visible statement of the company's elite branding. Inside the executive suite, Evelyn Pierce, the airline's chief customer officer, scrolled through the morning's agenda with unease gnawing at her. The quarterly customer experience review loomed at 10 a.m., and the numbers were troubling. Passenger complaints are up 11% since last quarter, she muttered, scanning the data again. Board members will be attending, her assistant reminded her as she handed over the day's briefing folder. And Mr. Morgan confirmed, he'll be joining in person. Evelyn's stomach turned slightly. Julian Morgan, the new owner of Altura Air, had taken over the airline 9 months ago. This would be his first appearance at a customer review, and his reputation for excellence and zero tolerance for excuses was infamous in the corporate world. Make sure Lauren Hayes, Mark Ellis, and Sandra Lee are in the room, Evelyn said. They've consistently led the top-performing crew. Well, want to spotlight them as part of our positive highlights. Meanwhile, across town, Julian adjusted his cufflinks in front of the mirror inside the couple's expansive penthouse. Every detail of his appearance was effortlessly refined. A navy-tailored suit, crisp white shirt, and a quiet sense of power that didn't need to shout. "You're sure you don't want me to address this directly with the flight crew?" he asked, watching Rachel's reflection as she sat quietly on the edge of their bed. Rachel shook her head. "This isn't about revenge, Julian. It's about shifting a culture." "They humiliated my wife," he replied, voice tight with restrained fury. "That feels personal to me." She stood and moved toward him, gently straightening the already perfect knot in his tie. "I love you for that. But this is bigger than us. This isn't just about 3 employees. It's about a mindset that decides who belongs based on how they look." Julian's shoulders softened. He looked at Rachel with the admiration of a man who still couldn't believe his luck. She had never let wealth distort her view of the world. "All right," he said. "We'll do it your way." He checked his watch. "The meeting starts in an hour." "I'm ready," Rachel said, "and you'll be wearing exactly what I wore yesterday." At Altura Air headquarters, the executive boardroom slowly filled with senior staff, division heads, and board members. Lauren, Mark, and Sandra sat together near the back, whispering among themselves. "I can't believe we were invited to this," Mark murmured. "Maybe they're finally launching that elite first-class service team," Sandra replied, her posture straight as ever. "If they are, we're the obvious choice to lead it." "I heard the new owner's actually coming in person," Lauren added under her breath. "This could be big for us." "Let's be sharp," Sandra said, smoothing a nearly invisible wrinkle from her sleeve. They quieted as Evelyn Pierce entered and took her place at the front. "Thank you for being here today," Evelyn began, voice crisp. "As you know, delivering a first-class experience, not just in name, but in feeling, is a cornerstone of our brand. Today, we'll review performance metrics and outline strategies to address key concerns." Just then, the door opened, and Julian Morgan entered the room. Heads turned immediately. The room fell into an anticipatory hush as he moved toward the head of the table with quiet authority. "Mr. Morgan," Evelyn greeted, standing quickly, "we're honored to have you with us." He nodded politely, taking his seat. "Please continue." As Evelyn resumed her presentation, highlighting satisfaction trends and areas of concern, Julian listened without expression, occasionally making notes in a sleek leather notebook. The data included a brief mention of positive ratings for first-class service. "I'd now like to highlight one of our top-performing teams," Evelyn said brightly. "Our premium cabin crew on cross-regional routes has consistently received excellent reviews. In fact, we've invited Lauren Hayes, our senior lead, along with Mark Ellis and Sandra Lee, to share some of their methods today." Julian looked toward the 3 crew members. His expression was unreadable. Lauren stood confidently and moved to the front. "At Altura Air," she began, "the luxury experience begins long before takeoff. Our team prides itself on identifying and meeting the expectations of premium travelers who trust us to deliver excellence." Just then, the conference room door opened again. She paused mid-sentence. A hush spread through the room as all eyes shifted to the entrance. Standing there, calm and poised, was Rachel Morgan, dressed exactly as she had been on the flight. Dark gray sweatshirt, light gray sweatpants, and her grandmother's silver bracelet shining softly at her wrist. For a moment, Lauren's mind stalled. She blinked in disbelief. Sandra and Mark visibly tensed in their seats. Julian stood. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, though his voice suggested otherwise. "I believe a few of you have already met my wife." The entire room froze in stunned silence. "This could be huge for us," Mark Ellis whispered. "If Mr. Morgan is actually attending, we might get noticed." Lauren Hayes shushed him as Evelyn Pierce stepped forward and tapped her notes into order. "Thank you all for being here," Evelyn began, addressing the boardroom full of executives and senior staff. "Customer experience remains the foundation of what we promise at Altura Air. Today we'll be reviewing this quarter's metrics and discussing steps toward continued improvement. The room grew quiet as the double doors opened again. All eyes turned as Julian Morgan entered. Tall, composed, and unmistakably authoritative, he walked with the silent confidence of a man who had built a global tech empire from scratch, and who knew exactly what every eye in the room was thinking. "Mr. Morgan," Evelyn greeted, her voice carefully measured. "We're honored to have you here." Julian offered a polite nod and took his seat at the head of the table. "Please, carry on." The presentation resumed. Charts and infographics appeared on the screen, highlighting trends, areas of concern, and a few bright spots. Julian said nothing, his expression unreadable as he made notes in a black leather notebook. "Now," Evelyn said, her voice lifting slightly with relief, "I'd like to recognize one of our high-performing teams. Our first-class service on trans-regional routes has achieved a 92% satisfaction rating, well above industry average." She gestured to the back of the room. "We have members of that crew here with us today: Lauren Hayes, Mark Ellis, and Sandra Lee. I've asked Lauren, our senior cabin lead, to share a few words on how her team delivers a world-class experience." Lauren stood with confidence and made her way to the front of the room. "Thank you, Evelyn," she began, smiling with practiced poise. "At Altura Air, we believe the first-class experience begins the moment a passenger steps aboard. Our training emphasizes personalized care, professionalism, and discretion. We know our premium guests expect excellence, not just in amenities, but in how they are treated." As she continued, the conference room doors opened once more. Quietly this time. She didn't notice at first. "We pride ourselves on creating an exclusive atmosphere where our passengers feel immediately welcomed." Then she saw it. Lauren's words trailed off. All attention in the room followed Julian's gaze, which had shifted toward the door. Standing there, calm, composed, and unmistakable, was Rachel Morgan, still dressed in her gray sweatshirt, matching sweatpants, and black cap. A glint from her wrist caught the light, the same silver bracelet she'd worn the day before. For a moment, no one moved. Then, realization dawned. Mark's face turned pale. Sandra's posture stiffened with sudden tension. Lauren, frozen mid-sentence, stared with wide, blinking eyes. Julian rose to his feet. "My apologies for the interruption," he said, though his tone betrayed not even a shred of regret. "Some of you may already be acquainted with my wife." The room fell into a stunned hush. A few gasps, one audible intake of breath from someone near the back. Every executive and crew member present turned their eyes between Julian, Rachel, and the trio of flight attendants, who now looked like they wished they could disappear. "Your wife?" Evelyn finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Julian said, with deliberate calm. "Rachel flew yesterday from Sierra City to Riverton, in first class, on this airline." Each word landed with precision, quiet but undeniable. Rachel stepped forward, joining him at the head of the room. She stood tall, unfazed, wearing the same outfit that had led to her being judged and removed from her seat. The only luxury on her person remained that silver bracelet, unpretentious, elegant, and deeply personal. Julian turned his gaze to Lauren. "You were explaining how your team is trained to recognize and support our premium passengers. Please, continue." Lauren's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her once polished confidence had evaporated under the weight of recognition. Sandra stared hard at the table in front of her, cheeks flushed. Mark's former smirk had collapsed into a tight, nervous line. There must have been a misunderstanding," Lauren finally stammered, her voice small. Julian tilted his head slightly. "A misunderstanding," he echoed, as if considering the word. Then he turned to Rachel. "Would you call what happened yesterday a misunderstanding?" Rachel stepped forward with a quiet strength that filled the room. Where Julian held his outrage just beneath a polished surface, Rachel radiated clear-eyed purpose. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. What happened yesterday, she said, was not a mistake. It was not confusion. It was judgment, plain and simple, based on how I looked. She turned toward the crew. You saw someone who didn't fit your image of a first-class passenger. You questioned my boarding pass multiple times. You asked for ID. You forced me to walk through the plane while others whispered and stared. And when I refused to explain myself or name drop, you treated me like I didn't belong. The silence in the room was profound. Rachel's tone didn't waver. And what made me unworthy, she asked. Was it the way I was dressed? The fact that I didn't flash a status symbol or a high-end bag? Because let's be honest, if I'd worn heels and pearls, we wouldn't be here right now. A few heads around the table dropped. Even Evelyn looked down at her notes, lips pressed tightly. Julian remained beside his wife, calm but fierce, his presence reinforcing every word she spoke. What happened yesterday, Rachel Morgan said, her voice ringing clear across the hushed room, was not a misunderstanding. Every person in the room had gone still. Even the air seemed to pause. It was bias, she continued. I wasn't judged by my ticket. It was checked, scanned, and confirmed multiple times. I was judged by my appearance. She turned her eyes, unwavering, to Lauren, Mark, and Sandra. You saw someone who didn't match your version of what first class looks like. You questioned my identity, something you didn't do for anyone else. You threatened to remove me. And then, in front of a plane full of strangers, you walked me back to economy, like I didn't matter. An uncomfortable shift moved through the boardroom. One of the senior members at the table cleared his throat and murmured, "Perhaps this conversation is better held in private." "No," Julian Morgan said firmly, not missing a beat. "This is exactly the conversation we need to have. Here, now." He stood with quiet intensity, his voice even but unmistakably resolute. "I'm not here just as a frustrated husband, though I am that," he said, eyes sweeping the room. "I'm here as the owner of this company, and what concerns me is the culture, one that devalues people based on what they wear or how they look, instead of how they should be treated." Evelyn Pierce looked visibly shaken. "Mr. Morgan, I assure you this doesn't reflect Altura Air's policies." "Doesn't it?" Rachel asked softly, stepping closer. "Because since yesterday, I've spoken with several other passengers and staff members, and I heard stories that were far too familiar." She placed a folder on the long conference table. Its sound echoed. 27 documented incidents in just 3 months, she said. A teenager in a hoodie, flying business class, stopped and questioned. A disabled man in a wheelchair redirected from the premium line. An elderly woman in casual clothes denied lounge access despite having the correct pass. She paused. All of them had the right credentials. None of them looked the part. The words landed like bricks. Evelyn reached for the folder, her hands trembling slightly. "I had no idea," she whispered. "That's the problem," Julian replied quietly. "You should have. These incidents weren't hidden. They were reported. But someone in this company kept labeling them misunderstandings and buried them." Lauren finally found her voice again, brittle and breaking. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan," she began, trying for poise, "on behalf of our team, I want to offer our sincerest apologies. There are protocols we're trained to follow regarding identity verification." "Stop," Rachel said gently but firmly. "You still don't get it." She looked directly at Lauren. "Last month when the man in seat 2C wore sweatpants and sneakers, did you ask him for ID?" Then to Sandra, "When the famous actress boarded in sunglasses and a baseball cap, did you stop her and ask where she was supposed to sit?" She turned to the whole room. "The protocol isn't the problem. The selective way it's used is." Mark, clearly feeling the walls closing in, leaned forward. "Mrs. Morgan, There was no way for us to know who you were. That's exactly the point, Rachel said. You shouldn't need to know someone's name, wealth, or status to treat them with dignity. I paid for my ticket like everyone else. That's enough. A heavy silence fell over the boardroom. Around the table, the impact of her words was unmistakable. Julian turned to the 3 crew members. Your actions yesterday were based in bias and poor judgment. In many companies, that would be grounds for immediate dismissal. Lauren, Mark, and Sandra seemed to brace themselves. The tension in their posture revealed their expectation of termination, but Julian didn't deliver that blow. Firing you would make us feel like we solved something, he continued, but it wouldn't change anything. The culture that created that moment would stay exactly the same. He turned to address everyone in the room. So here's what we're going to do. I'll personally oversee the changes, said Evelyn Pierce, finding her voice at last. And I believe we should also reach out to the passengers Mrs. Morgan identified in her report to offer compensation. Julian Morgan nodded in agreement, then turned his focus back to the flight crew seated before him. This isn't about punishment, he said. It's about understanding. He paused to let his words settle in the room. The true measure of premium service isn't how well you cater to those who look important. It's how you treat everyone equally, regardless of their appearance. As the reality of the moment settled into the room, a new voice entered the conversation. Eleanor Sharp, the chairwoman of the board, spoke for the first time. I believe we owe Mrs. Morgan our gratitude, she said, her voice strong and clear. She's revealed a serious blind spot in our operation, one that, left unaddressed, could have quietly continued eroding our brand and alienating our customers. This is our chance to make meaningful change. Across the room, Lauren, Mark, and Sandra sat in stunned silence. Their earlier confidence had vanished, replaced with a quiet understanding that they were being offered something rare. Not just consequences, but an opportunity to grow. Not punishment, growth. 3 months later, Rachel Morgan stepped aboard Altura Air Flight 923 from Sierra City to Bay Harbor, settling into Seat 2A. She wore the same outfit as that day. Dark gray sweatshirt, light gray sweatpants, black cap. A familiar silver bracelet rested on her wrist, catching a glint of sunlight through the window as she opened her paperback and prepared for the 5-hour flight to a climate research summit. Good morning, Mrs. Morgan, came a familiar voice. Can I offer you a beverage before takeoff? Rachel looked up and met the eyes of Mark Ellis. His tone was warm, his posture professional, and the subtle air of judgment from months ago was gone, replaced with something entirely different: respect. Just water, thank you, Rachel replied. As he placed the glass gently on her tray, he hesitated. Mrs. Morgan, I don't know if you remember me. I remember you, Mark. He nodded, almost solemnly. I wanted to thank you. These last few months, they've been eye-opening. Rachel regarded him with quiet curiosity. How was your time in customer advocacy? Humbling, he said without hesitation. I had no idea how many passengers felt overlooked, dismissed, or quietly judged. It wasn't just what we said. It was the assumptions we carried, the things we never even realized we projected. People usually notice, Rachel replied gently, even when they don't speak up. Further down the aisle, she spotted Sandra helping an elderly man in well-worn jeans with his overhead bag. She was patient and kind, her gestures gentle but efficient. It was a small moment, but a real one. The training you and Mr. Morgan put in place, Mark said, it changed everything. Not just policies, mindsets, the way we see people. I'm glad to hear that, Rachel said, offering a nod of appreciation. Mark straightened, returning to his professional rhythm. Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Morgan. If you need anything at all, I'm here. As he moved down the aisle, Rachel's eyes found Lauren Hayes in the galley. She was checking the beverage cart, preparing for takeoff with focused ease. Their eyes met briefly, and Lauren gave her a subtle, respectful nod. Not out of fear, but recognition. Acknowledgement of a moment that had changed them both. The ripple effects of that day had extended well beyond a single cabin crew. Altura Air's anti-bias initiative had been implemented across every level, from gate agents to executives. Customer satisfaction scores had climbed. Staff morale had improved. Employees felt empowered to treat every passenger with equal respect, not based on wealth or clothing, but simple human decency. Other airlines were beginning to take notice. Altura's inclusive service model had sparked conversation across the industry. Old assumptions were being challenged. A new standard was forming, not just for how luxury should look, but for how respect should feel. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, Rachel gazed out the window at the quilted landscape below. Miles of farmland, rivers, and open skies stretching toward the horizon. She thought about how a single moment of injustice, quiet, personal, painful, had become the spark for meaningful, lasting transformation. Not through outrage, not through revenge, but through something more powerful: education, accountability, change from within. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A message from Julian. "How's the flight?" She smiled and typed back, "Different. Better." A few rows ahead, a young woman in ripped jeans and a vintage t-shirt leaned into her seat, laughing with a friend. No one gave her a second glance. No one questioned her place in the cabin. She was just another first-class passenger. And that, Rachel realized, was the real victory. The cabin was quiet except for the soft hum of the engines and the gentle murmur of conversations. Around Rachel Morgan, business executives and casual travelers sat side by side, some in suits, others in hoodies or leggings. No second glances, no disapproving stares, no whispered judgments. And that, she realized, was the real victory. Not the vindication of her own experience, but the small, quiet dignities now extended to others. Dignities that had once been denied to people who, like her, simply didn't look the part. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Lauren Hayes pushed the beverage cart slowly down the aisle, her posture composed, her expression kind. She moved with intention, stopping at each row, treating every passenger with the same level of care, whether they wore designer shoes or faded sneakers. When she reached Rachel's row, she paused. Their eyes met. "Mrs. Morgan," she said gently, "I just want you to know. What you and Mr. Morgan did was fair. More than fair. It's made us better at what we do." Rachel nodded. "That was the point," she said. "Not to punish. To help change something." Lauren nodded back, her voice softer now. "I've learned to see people differently. To question the assumptions I didn't even know I was making. It has changed how I treat not just passengers, but everyone." With a quiet, mutual understanding, Lauren moved on. Rachel leaned back in her seat, her thoughts turning inward. Change, she knew, rarely came from dramatic headlines or sweeping speeches. Real change came in moments. Individual choices, quiet acknowledgments, the building of better systems, and the courage to name what needs to be changed. The plane banked slightly westward, carrying its diverse collection of travelers through the sky. Each of them different, each of them equally deserving of respect, regardless of what they wore, what they earned, or where they came from. Such a simple truth. And yet, in today's world, so easy to forget. Rachel glanced down at her soft gray sweatshirt, the same one that had sparked judgment weeks earlier. Her cap rested beside her. The silver bracelet on her wrist shimmered under the cabin lights. The victory, she realized, wasn't that she could now fly first class without being questioned. The victory was that more people could.